Additionally, defense attorney Wayne M. Collins Sr. gave producer Montanari access to all his files containing Mr. Collins's trial transcripts, trial exhibits, and many documents. All broadcasts you will hear are from Radio Tokyo in their original form as heard by the American and Allied forces in the Pacific 1942 through 1945. Further, you will hear 4 women broadcasters, all referred to as Tokyo Rose.
Thank you. That's all for now, enemies. But there'll be more of the same tomorrow night. Until then, this is Orphan Ann, your number one enemy, reminding you, GI, always to be good. Goodbye now.
The story of Tokyo Rose actually begins with the Exclusion Act of 1924. James Duval Phelan and Hiram W. Johnson, California senators in the early 1900s, were 2 of the most powerful politicians on the West Coast. They were also the architects of the Exclusion Act and were eager to rid the state of what they considered the enemy within our gates. The commander of the Western Defense, General John DeWitt, shared the Johnson and Phelan opinion of the Japanese and their American-born children. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, DeWitt helped convince President Roosevelt to order Japanese Americans living on the coast to be rounded up and sent to internment camps. DeWitt told Congress that a Jap is a Jap. They are a dangerous element, whether loyal or not. There's no difference whether he's an American. Theoretically, you cannot change him by giving him a piece of paper. The Toguri family of the Watts area of Los Angeles were one of the first to lose a family member during the ordeal of internment. Mrs. Toguri died at a stopover at the Tule Lake Processing Center in California. By the middle of 1942, the Toguris were interned at 52-6-D, Gila River Relocation Center in Arizona. The entire Toguri family was on the internment roster, except the oldest daughter, Iva. As fate would have it, Iva was with relatives in Japan at the time her family was interned. Iva Toguri had enjoyed a happy, all-American life in Los Angeles. She attended UCLA as a pre-med science major and graduated in January 1941. In the spring of 1941, Iva's mother received a letter asking her to come to Japan and help care for her ailing sister. But Mrs. Toguri's health was also failing, and she could not make the long voyage. Mr. Toguri and son Fred were born in Japan, and due to the 1924 Exclusion Act, would not be allowed to re-enter the United States if they left. Iva Toguri is an American citizen by birth, so it became Iva's obligation to go to Japan in her mother's place. Her ship was due to depart from San Pedro Pier on July 5th, the day after Iva's 25th birthday. Mr. Toguri purchased a third-class ticket. With third class, there was no provision for round trip. Not having time to process a passport, as it was an acceptable practice at the time, Iva typed on a piece of plain paper.
I, Ikuko Toguri, being duly sworn, deposes and says that I was born on July 4th, 1916 in the city of Los Angeles, county of Los Angeles, state of California. That the purpose of my trip to Japan is to visit my aunt, who is eagerly awaiting my visiting her. That I intend to return to the United States of America within 6 months.
Iva's document was accepted on her arrival in Japan on July 25th, but she was told to apply for her American passport as soon as possible. At the American consulate, Iva found out that she was not alone. As early as 1935, many first-generation American Japanese, the Nisei, left the United States seeking jobs they could not obtain at home due to racial prejudice. So they went to their parents' homeland and found themselves tolerated but unwelcome. Iva felt 6 months seemed to be sufficient time to help take care of her aunt. However, communication was a serious problem because Iva could not read or write Japanese. Unable to tolerate the Japanese rice, her uncle had to trade rice rations for bread. In the fall of 1941, the war drums grew louder as the Japanese expanded their empire. In mid-November, Iva spoke with her father by phone, and he told her to come home as soon as possible. On December 1st, 1941, Iva received an official letter from the American consulate regarding her passport. It stated, "Madam, your application was duly forwarded to Washington, and there has not been time for a reply." December 7th, early Sunday morning, the Japanese strike Pearl Harbor. America and Japan are at war. Iva Toguri is one of a great number of Nisei trapped in Japan. Radio Tokyo, which had been broadcasting anti-American programs, stepped up its propaganda after Pearl Harbor. Believing female voices would demoralize American troops, Radio Tokyo added more female broadcasters, predominantly Japanese citizens educated in the United States.
And that was the Victor Light Opera Company under the direction of Nathaniel Shortcut singing selections from Birds from Dreamland. In this connection, a Japanese naval spokesman declared that there are no reports on activities of Japanese undersea craft in the waters around the border.
Several of these women read POW messages until the arrival of actual POW announcers.
I am well. Do not worry. We are now acclimated to the winter weather of Japan and doing very well. We'll send a message whenever the opportunity is afforded. Keep the bill in college.
An American sailor stationed in the Philippines in 1942 reported,
"On January 4th, 1942, I heard a girl broadcast in English from Radio Tokyo for the first time. This was a girl whom I heard on the radio many times after that and who was called Tokyo Rose by the men about me. I was on the USS Stingray, and we had sunk a ship that morning. The girl's broadcast was about 7 p.m., and it lasted approximately 15 minutes. She spent practically the whole time criticizing the United States Navy for sinking the ship."
At the time the sailor heard the broadcaster, identified by his friends as Tokyo Rose, Iva Toguri had never seen the inside of a radio station. Also at this time, anti-American pressures had forced Iva to leave her aunt and uncle's neighborhood and find a job. She took a clerical position at the Dome News Agency in downtown Tokyo. Her pro-American attitude led to her termination at Dome, and in early 1943 she obtained another clerical position 1 block away, at Radio Tokyo. At Radio Tokyo, producers George Mitsushio and Ken Oki, both U.S.-born but now choosing dual citizenship, had created Zero Hour during the Battle of Guadalcanal. Zero Hour was a program of stateside music Japanese intelligence hoped would demoralize American and Allied troops in the Pacific. By spring of 1943, many of these Allied troops had been captured and were being held in Japanese prison camps throughout the Pacific. Upon learning of the popularity of Zero Hour among the American and Australian prisoners, Major Tsuneishi, the intelligence officer in charge of Radio Tokyo, ordered these POWs to be carefully screened for any previous broadcasting experience and had the most qualified brought to Japan to work at Radio Tokyo. These are some of the POWs held at Camp Bunka, the propaganda camp in Tokyo. They were ordered to broadcast POW messages from prisoner of war camps throughout the Pacific. These were read over 2 programs, Hinomaru Hour and The Postman Calls. Among the POWs at Bunka are Australians Ken Parkins and Major Charles H. Cousins, Harry Pearson of the RAF, and Americans Major Willison Cox, Sergeant John Provo, Captain Ted Wallace Ince, Lieutenant Bucky Henshaw, Captain Edwin Kalbfleisch, and Sergeant Frank Fu Fujita, the first Japanese-American held prisoner in Japan. Frank Fujita recalls that time in captivity.
On December the 1st, 1943, they moved 14 of us into a new camp 8 blocks north of the Imperial Palace, and it was called Bunka, or Camp Bunka, B-U-N-K-A. We were told when we got there that we were to broadcast on the radio and that we would do as we were told or our lives would not be guaranteed.
Although the men at Bunka were spared some of the brutality other POWs were receiving at camps in Nagasaki and Omori on the other side of Tokyo, a few of the men had experienced brutal treatment in those camps. The atrocities at Nagasaki were recorded by POW Sergeant Fujita in his drawings. Major Charles H. Cousins, the senior POW officer at the station, was a well-known Australian broadcaster in the 1930s and a graduate of Sandhurst, England's West Point. Major Cousins initially resisted stubbornly, under threats of death, to broadcast for Radio Tokyo. However, he began to see the advantages of broadcasting for the Japanese. He became the primary reason 0 Hour and the POW messages were kept on the air.
This is Robert Shores, Private First Class of the Marine Corps, and I wish to convey a message to my mother that I am somewhere in Japan, feeling fine and being well treated by the Japanese, and that I hope that we'll all be well and safe and back home soon. And Mother, don't worry, because I know we're being treated the best.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have just been listening to the voices of the American war prisoners who were brought back to Japan several days ago from Wake Island.
Due to its popularity, Cousins was ordered to expand 0 Hour to 1 hour and 20 minutes and increase POW messages. Cousins, American Captain Ted Ince, and Philippine officer Norman Reyes decided to add a female voice to 0 Hour. Cousins will write scripts and coach her. Ince will read and write commentaries, while Reyes continues to play the records. Although there were already numerous female announcers broadcasting POW messages, news, and commentaries at Radio Tokyo, Cousins insisted on using Iva Toguri, a typist in the front office with no prior radio experience. He liked her personality and foggy voice. Cousins, Ince, and Reyes believe in her American spirit and loyalty. Isolated in a foreign land, Iva identified herself on 0 Hour as Orphan Ann.
Until then, this is Orphan Ann, your number one enemy, reminding you, GI, always to be good. Goodbye now.
Iva was given a 20-minute segment 5 days a week from November of 1943 to August 1945. Under the circumstances, she was happy to be working with other Americans and allies. Her unique position allowed her to routinely risk smuggling what vitamins and simple medicines she could for the POWs. She also bought fruit for them on the black market. Meanwhile, U.S. Army intelligence wanted to know exactly who Tokyo Rose was. In 1944, they believed so strongly that the missing Amelia Earhart could be Tokyo Rose that high-ranking intelligence officers ordered her husband, renowned publisher Major George Putnam, to China to monitor Radio Tokyo. On his return, Putnam said not one of the broadcast voices was Amelia's, and he would stake his life on it. Meanwhile, the mythical Tokyo Rose had taken on a persona of her own for both Allied troops and the American public. All female broadcasters for the Rising Sun, well over a dozen, became that evil dragon lady of the air, known as Tokyo Rose. This Tokyo Rose literally took to the air on the side of one of the B-29s, which were increasing raids over Tokyo. This is a first-hand account of those raids, recalled by POW broadcaster Darwin Dodds.
It was a 50,000-watt shortwave station, GOAK, so I went down every day except Sunday. And lots of times after the bombings really got started, the air raid siren would blow. We would sit there while the B-29s were bombing, and we felt that the bombers many times were coming in on our radio signal for as using as an aiming point, and we knew that they were coming in from time to time on that signal because not once did they take that program off the air, not once.
June 29, 1945, Thomas Campbell Clark was appointed Attorney General of the United States. The new Attorney General would oversee many prosecutions for treason, including Mildred Giller, a.k.a. Axis Sally, for her anti-Jewish broadcasts from Germany.
Within a few inches of the gates of heaven with that sweet little old voice of yours and a darling little old song.
Also arrested for treasonous broadcasts on Nazi radio was Douglas Chandler, a former American journalist. This is Douglas Chandler, a.k.a. Paul Revere.
From the home, strong, imperishable German Reich, your messenger Paul Revere greets you again, compatriot, and friend.
Next was Robert Best, also a former American journalist who did anti-Jewish, anti-Roosevelt programs for the Nazis.
There is one thing and one thing only which can save America from a catastrophic, unimpaired situation.
America's well-known poet Ezra Pound was arrested by military intelligence in Italy. He broadcast some of the most anti-Semitic, anti-Roosevelt programs from the comforts of Rome.
Ezra Pound speaking from Rome. For the United States to be making war on Italy and on Europe is just plain damn nonsense.
As General MacArthur accepted the Japanese surrender, American armed forces began the occupation of the Japanese mainland. Many reporters came in with the troops, but were ordered by MacArthur to stay out of Tokyo and Yokohama. Among them, Harry T. Brundage, a reporter for Cosmopolitan magazine, and Clark Lee, a field reporter for international news services in New York. Disobeying MacArthur's off-limits orders, they went into Tokyo and Yokohama to get exclusives on the conditions of the cities made famous by the B-29 bombings. While in Tokyo, Lee decided to follow up on a lead from his home office to find Tokyo Rose. Lee asked former United Press associate Leslie Nakashima, an American reporter caught in Japan during the war, to go to Radio Tokyo and find Tokyo Rose. Nakashima approached his friend at the station, Ken Oki, who told him none of the female broadcasters at Radio Tokyo had ever used that name. No one at the station or in Japan could really appreciate how the image of Tokyo Rose had been used to fuel the war effort back in the United States. In fact, Oki mused that it could be his own wife, Mieko, who had been broadcasting as Betty. Or perhaps it could be Iva Toguri. Nakashima decided to follow up on broadcaster Toguri. He took Iva and her new husband, Philip D'Aquino, to meet Brundage and Lee at the Imperial Hotel. Both reporters were in military attire. The door was locked, and Brundage's gun and holster lay on a table. Brundage offered Iva $2,000 for her story. Lee asked, "Are you Tokyo Rose?" Naively, Iva said yes, then recanted. She said there were 4 other women broadcasting on 0 hour. Lee told her that he only needed one and she would do, as she signed the contract. As Iva and her husband left the hotel room, Lee suggested she hire an attorney. In Tokyo, the day after Iva's interview with Lee and Brundage, a contingent of reporters surrounded the newly discovered Tokyo Rose. U.S. Army information specialists asked Iva to cooperate with a mock-up sound film of Iva broadcasting. The Army prepared her lines loosely based on cousin scripts. Iva was told the film would be for the information and education of military personnel only. As Iva received attention from a clamoring press, her friends at Bunka Camp were part of the celebration of liberated POWs throughout Tokyo. A month and a half later, a knock on their door turns the D'Aquinos' lives into a seemingly endless nightmare. U.S. Army counterintelligence agents arrested Iva on suspicion of committing treasonable acts by giving aid and comfort to the enemy. She was jailed and denied the right to an attorney. Iva was imprisoned in Sugamo in Tokyo, where war criminals such as the infamous General Tojo were jailed. Assistant U.S. Attorney Charles Carr of Southern California asked Attorney General Tom Clark to hold Iva Toguri's trial in her hometown of Los Angeles, even though complaints inundated his office, warning Tokyo Rose's presence would cause a race riot. Carr was replaced by James Carter, who in September of 1946 received a memo from Washington. Iva Toguri treason. War Department is pressing Criminal Division for immediate advice as to disposition of this case. Subject still in Army's custody. Request your recommendation on prosecution at earliest possible convenience. Mr. Carter replied to Washington on the same date. Regarding Iva Toguri, further investigation mentioned in correspondence has not strengthened this case. We feel evidence inadequate. Recommend treason prosecution be declined. General Willoughby, commander of G2, Army Intelligence, wanted to release Iva, concluding that she had committed no military crimes. Attorney General Clark was unhappy with a possible release and demanded Iva be kept locked up until the FBI could interview her. The FBI concluded it couldn't find enough evidence to continue holding her. After 1 year in prison, Iva was released on October 26, 1946. That same year in Australia, Major Charles Cousins was on trial for treason. He referred to Iva in courtroom testimony. I suggested using Iva Toguri. The others laughed because she was in the accounts department and, as far as we knew, had no broadcasting experience. I had been considerably amused by her extraordinary gruff voice and her very hearty, blunt manner. I arranged for a microphone and tested her out. Her voice came through the microphone as I hoped it would. I was sure in my mind that we were about to do the best we possibly could to wreck the whole Japanese idea behind the program. Ironically, while Iva had been in jail in Japan as Tokyo Rose, at the Cousins trial, former POW broadcaster Bucky Henshaw testified that Tokyo Rose was present in the Australian courtroom in the person of Fumio Sashio. Sashio, a Japanese nationalist, had been called as a witness against Cousins. She had edited Cousins' scripts and also did broadcasting for Radio Tokyo. And the POWs, including Henshaw, believed her to be a double agent. Cousins was acquitted of any treasonable acts during his POW broadcasting from 1942 through 1945. However, the Australian military stripped Cousins of his rank and cashed him out. Cousins resumed his professional career in Sydney. In the United States, Attorney General Tom Clark had one major crisis after another, including the growing communist paranoia. There were over 200 possible Communist Party associations to divide and conquer, and there were the treason and spy trials. Chief Prosecutor for the Justice Department, Tom DeWolf, had won convictions against Best and Chandler. About the same time in 1947, Iva Toguri Dakino walked into the American consulate in Tokyo to apply once again for her passport and a visa for her husband. At the Justice Department, Assistant Attorney General Quinn issued this memo. After careful analysis of the available evidence, this department concluded that prosecution of this individual for treason was not warranted. Therefore, this department will have no objections to issue of passport to Mrs. Dakino.
Ladies and gentlemen.
However, Walter Winchell waged a furious campaign to have the Attorney General return Tokyo Rose to America for trial. In post-World War II America, columnist and radio personality Walter Winchell was a very powerful man, with the ability to influence millions of people. He was feared by everyone, even presidents. A close friend of FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover, both allegedly kept incriminating files on every major politician, actor, and writer. In an attempt to tone down attacks on the Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney James Carter proposed a meeting with Winchell. Very few people ever had an opportunity to speak with Winchell face-to-face. A meeting was arranged through Joseph Schenck, a high-ranking official at 20th Century Fox. Amazingly, the Justice Department went to Winchell. The meeting took place in Winchell's office at the Fox Studios in Hollywood. Carter attempted to update Winchell on the Tokyo Rose file. Winchell said that he had all the facts. Carter told Winchell that as long as he was an attorney with the Justice Department, he was not going to recommend prosecution unless there was a case against the defendant. Carter mentioned the letters he had received from GIs all over the world criticizing the possible prosecution of Tokyo Rose, claiming that the broadcasts, instead of being morale breakers, were morale boosters. Winchell replied these letters were probably written by communists. Aiding Winchell in his campaign to bring Tokyo Rose to trial were such patriotic groups as the American Legion and the Native Sons of the Golden West. In 1948, John L. Lewis, the powerful president of the Coal Miners Union, called a national strike. It virtually paralyzed America, bringing another crisis to the Attorney General's office. Winchell offered Clark no reprieve during the strike. He kept up his relentless attacks on Clark to bring Tokyo Rose home to trial. Meanwhile, Harry Brundage's series of articles claiming he had a signed confession from Tokyo Rose was published in the Nashville Tennessean. Clark and his staff wanted to put a clamp on Brundage's mouth and typewriter. The articles hampered the department's ability to build a strong case against Iva Toguri. Clark wrote to Silliman Evans, the publisher of the Tennessean. The boys are a little disturbed on the Tokyo Rose matter. It would be helpful if no publicity came out until action was taken. I will let you know. Ignoring the Attorney General's pleas, Evans continued with the articles. He published Brundage's article interviewing former POW Norman Reyes, who at the time was tagged as a government witness. The Attorney General directed U.S. Attorney John Hogan to confront Brundage regarding the alleged confession. Brundage told Hogan it was lost or stolen. Amazingly, he had published a series of 8 articles based on a confession he could not produce. Realizing that they might not have a case without the confession, in March of 1948, Hogan convinced Clark to send himself and Brundage, as agents of the Justice Department, to Tokyo to obtain another statement from Iva Toguri. In Tokyo, as a courtesy to the Justice Department, Army intelligence escorted Iva to Hogan and Brundage at GHQ, Military Intelligence Headquarters. There she was asked to read the notes taken by Brundage and Lee at the 1945 interview. She read the notes and acknowledged with her signature that they were accurate. Additionally, Brundage located a friend named Hirom Yagi, who was convinced to testify on behalf of the government. While Brundage and Hogan were looking for evidence in Japan, Chief Prosecutor DeWolf told the Attorney General there was insufficient evidence against Iva. Frank Green of the FCC had reported the few recordings made of Iva's broadcasts were in poor condition.
Hello there, you bad person, somewhere in that pool of water called the Pacific. This is your playmate, Orphan Ann, taking roll call. That's right. Waiting again to present music for you.
Against all departmental advice, on August 26, 1948, the Attorney General directed the Army to apprehend Iva on suspicion of treasonable conduct. She was 32 years old at the time of her third and last arrest. The Justice Department wanted the trial stateside and decided to transport her via ship. Iva was taken under guard to the port of Yokohama, where she boarded the General Hodges for Fort Mason in San Francisco. Mr. Toguri began a search to find an attorney to defend his daughter. He was referred to Wayne M. Collins at the Mills Tower in San Francisco. Collins, a founding member of the American Civil Liberties Union, had successfully stopped the deportation of 1,800 Peruvian Japanese to Japan in 1943. Rounded up by the Peruvian government, they had been brought to the United States to be used in exchange for American POWs. Collins had also stopped the deportation to Japan of 4,300 Japanese Americans, so-called renunciants, American citizens the government claimed had renounced their citizenship. Mr. Toguri asked this fierce champion of civil liberties to defend his daughter. September 25, 1948, Iva arrived at San Francisco's Fort Mason. Iva was escorted by FBI agents Fred Tillman and John Dunn to a court hearing. Wayne Collins met Iva in the court building and asked her one question: "Did you do it?" Iva replied, "No, I didn't." And Collins said, "Then let's get started." The grand jury was convened to consider the treason charges against Iva. They heard the testimony of 9 government witnesses. Chief Prosecutor DeWolf had trouble convincing 2 of the 23 grand jury members to vote for an indictment. John Gildersleeve was against the indictment because he believed Iva had lost her citizenship under the Nationalities Act of 1940. Gildersleeve recalls Prosecutor DeWolf.
He could have stood up before that grand jury and said, "I think Toguri is guilty. I would like to have you people agree with me," and they would have voted the indictment without listening to a single goddamn witness.
Grand jury member Winton Teal wondered how many of the broadcasts were actually heard.
I specifically brought up the question, well, is it not true that due to Allied air raids at Sutter, Radio Tokyo was off the air? As it is conceivable that certain of these utterances you heard may not in fact have been broadcast. And the acts which were committed did not represent treasonable acts in my lexicon.
DeWolf, now a veteran courtroom strategist who had put Chandler, Best, and Axis Sally behind bars, was frustrated with Teal and Gildersleeve's doubts. He writes to a colleague in the Attorney General's office, "It was necessary for me to practically make a 4th of July speech in order to obtain an indictment." DeWolf informed the Criminal Division that in his review of the possible treason cases of John Provo, Mark Streeter, Iva Toguri, and Ted Ince, the department should evaluate the cases in order of importance. First, Provo, second, Streeter, third, Toguri, and fourth, Ince. Streeter, a civilian captured on Wake Island, and Sergeant Provo had been arrested at Bunka for causing hardship on their fellow prisoners. Sergeant Provo had allegedly caused the death of a fellow officer. Ince, of course, worked with Iva. Of these 4 Americans, it was only Iva, the Japanese-American, whose case would be carried over to trial. At this time, reporter Harry Brundage was being investigated for bribery. It was reported that Brundage had bribed grand jury witness Hirom Yagi to come to the United States and tell the grand jury that he saw and heard Iva Toguri call herself Tokyo Rose on the air. Yagi confessed to the FBI in Japan that he accepted the bribe from Brundage and lied to the grand jury. The Justice Department, while shocked by news of a government witness being bribed, would give the following reasons for not prosecuting Brundage. We believe that such action, taken prior to the completion of the litigation involving Iva Toguri Dakino, would completely destroy any chance of a conviction in her case. We further believe that it would be unwise to initiate such prosecution of Brundage at any time because the chance of convicting a white man upon the testimony of 2 Japanese, particularly in California, is very slight. In the spring of 1949, the Justice Department allocated $3,000 for attorney Ted Tamba, Wayne Collins's trial partner, to seek witnesses and take depositions in Japan. George Buddy Uno was considered a possible witness. He had written scripts for Myrtle Liston, a.k.a. Manila Myrtle. Where Zero Hour had opened with Strike Up the Band, Myrtle's show opened with either Old Lang Syne or Waterloo Bridge, and played a few nostalgic songs like Tea for Two and Remember. Uno helped write Myrtle's scripts that included the phrase, 4 F's, having fun with your wives. The defense wanted this testimony to establish another female broadcaster in the Pacific, but Tamba felt Uno would prove to be an unreliable witness. The pretrial scramble for witnesses would continue. Charles Cousins wanted desperately to be a witness for the defense. He wrote to Wayne Collins saying, "If it were not for me, Iva would not be on the air." Collins accepted Cousins' offer to be a volunteer witness and that of another former POW broadcaster, Australian Ken Parkins. The defense team was already working for no fee and was at great personal expense to Collins and to Iva's father that Cousins and Parkins were flown to the United States. The prosecution team, with the resources of the federal government, were able to fly 26 witnesses from Japan to San Francisco. A number of these witnesses were Nisei, who had renounced their citizenship during the war. They would now be testifying against Iva, who had stubbornly refused to renounce her American citizenship. These Japanese witnesses were lodged at the Whitcomb Hotel, not far from the federal court building in San Francisco. Strangely enough, the jury was also sequestered there. Another notable guest staying at the Whitcomb during the trial was Harry Brundage. Federal Judge Michael J. Roach was assigned to case 31712-R, the U.S.A. versus Iva Ikuko Toguri Dakino. The trial date, July 5th, the day after Iva's 33rd birthday. In a 32-page opening statement on July 5th, the name Tokyo Rose was not mentioned once by the chief prosecutor. DeWolf read the indictment to the jury, which accused Iva of giving aid and comfort to the enemy, intent to adhere to the imperial Japanese government for purpose of aiding the Japanese government, and to betray her native land, the United States of America. She was specifically charged with 8 overt acts of treason. The government's whole case was focused entirely on Radio Tokyo's 0 Hour from November 1944 to August 1945, when POW's Major Cousins and Captain Ince wrote the scripts, Norman Reyes was in charge of the records, and Iva Toguri was the announcer. The trial lasted for 61 days, with 57 volumes of testimony and several hundred exhibits. The prosecution had a list of 71 possible witnesses. One government witness, Colonel Tsuneishi, the Japanese military officer in charge of radio propaganda, told the court the purpose of 0 Hour was to make the enemy homesick. Prosecution witness Ken Ishii, the suave, half-British, half-Japanese broadcaster at Radio Tokyo, testified that he had helped Iva take food and medicine to Major Cousins when he'd been ill. Ishii indicated to the court that Iva wasn't conscious of betraying her country. It was the zero-hour producers, Mitsushio and Oki, who provided the prosecution's strongest testimony by claiming they heard Iva broadcast, "Now that all your ships are lost, how are you orphans going to get home?" Other than this testimony, no recordings or scripts of the broadcast were produced as evidence in court. After 6 weeks and 47 witnesses, the prosecution rested, feeling they had proven treason. The defense opened with Iva's co-workers, Cousins, Ince, and Rays.
Major Cousins went into the gruesome details of punishment and death in relation to the Jap treatments of prisoners. He detailed how he selected Iva for the program, trained her as a broadcaster and a saboteur of the Japanese purpose. The jury felt he was too enthusiastic. Captain Ince followed on the stand and was quite the opposite. He volunteered nothing. Both stated that Iva was a source of supply of much food, medicine, blankets, and so forth that found their way to the 27 prisoners of war being held at Radio Tokyo and quartered in the Bunka prison camp.
All Bunka camp POW testimony about treatment by their captors and the issue of duress was successfully blocked by the prosecution. Several GIs who heard the broadcasts in the Pacific said they never considered the broadcasts anything other than entertainment. Nisei friends in Tokyo, Yoneki Kansaki and Chiako Ito, testified that they had discussed renouncing American citizenship with Iva. This would have ended harassment by the secret police, but they decided against it. Iva had declared she would not give up her precious American citizenship by just signing a piece of paper. Husband Philip Dacchino testified how he had been in a physical fight at Domei when co-workers had berated Iva for her pro-American attitude. At last, Iva was put on the stand for several days and ended her direct examination by emphatically denying each and every overt act of treason. After 57 days, the case was ready for the jury. On Monday, September 26th, a ballot was immediately taken on the question of guilt. It was evenly split between guilt and acquittal. All overt acts were eliminated from consideration except two. Act number 5. During October 1944, the defendant prepared a broadcast concerning the loss of ships. And Act number 6. During October 1944, the defendant did speak into a microphone concerning the loss of ships. By Tuesday evening, the jury notified the court they were deadlocked. Judge Roach reminded the jury of the terrific expense already incurred and urged them to make every attempt to reach a verdict. It was still 9 for conviction and 3 for acquittal. Foreman John Mann was one of the 3 for acquittal who questioned the intent to betray the United States. Thursday evening, Judge Roach refused the jury's request to clarify his instructions. After 4 days of deliberation, the holdouts for acquittal folded. Despite lack of hard evidence, there was a unanimous guilty vote on overt act number 6, the broadcast on loss of ships. On October 6, 1949, Judge Roach sentenced Iva Toguri Dacchino to 10 years in Alderson Federal Prison for Women in West Virginia. Iva was also fined $10,000. The treason conviction automatically stripped Iva of her American citizenship. She was once again without a country. Foreman John Mann lived with his own guilt for many years after the trial. In an interview in 1975, he freely admitted,
"I figure I did the wrong thing. I should have stuck with acquittal."
After serving 6 of her 10 years, Iva was released in 1956 for good behavior. 2 weeks later, U.S. immigration officials attempted to deport her as an undesirable alien.
Mrs. Diaquina, do you consider yourself a citizen or an alien as far as this hearing is concerned, this deportation hearing?
Well, I think I'm a United States citizen. I was born here. I don't know what else I could be.
In other words, you intend to fight any deportation proceedings?
That I don't know what I'm going to do. I mean, how it's going to be handled.
You definitely hope to live here in Chicago, though, rather than on, for instance, the West Coast.
My movements are limited, and I'm still under the supervision.
You'll be staying right here, then?
Yes, I will.
Do you have any regrets?
What do you mean, regret?
For having broadcast with the Japanese?
I would rather not comment on that. I would like a 50-50 chance to get on my feet.
Wayne Collins was able to successfully block the deportation order.
After her weekend, Annie, back on the air, strictly under